Hello, and welcome to the Movie Universe. I'm your host, Movie Fan. Well, we've now approached part 3 of the Disney Legends saga, so today I'm going to be talking about Paul Bunyan. Now, as you would expect, it tells a story of Paul and basically his life and career. Well, most of it anyway. It starts with one of the local lumberjacks telling how Paul was born. Apparently, there was a very strange nor'easter on the East Coast, and when they woke up, they found a small ship, which was actually a cradle.
Well, I'll be hornswoggled. A baby! And it's a whopper!
The entire town adopts him, they take care of him, and they named him Paul. They educated him, they gave him everything he needed, like clothes and all that stuff. And of course, eventually, during one Christmas, they give him a double-bladed axe. And of course, right away, he proved to be a fine lumberjack. And as they put it, the town grew because of the lumber he cut, and it became a little too crowded for him, so it was time for him to move on. Then we move on to another chapter in the story, which is told by a different narrator, who talks about when he first met Paul, just walking right over to him. Along the way, we learn how he meets Babe, his beloved blue ox, and we hear quite a few of the classic stories of Paul Bunyan. For instance,
the two of them headed west, but the storm got worse, and they got so lost. Well, sir, they left lots of tracks behind them. And come spring, those tracks filled with water. And this area became known as the land of 10,000 lakes. Dug the Missouri River to float the logs to the sawmills. And then, so they could look the country over and see what else to do, they built Pike's Peak. Then Paul and Babe got into a big tug of war. They piled dirt and rocks so high, it formed a range of mountains. Today, they are called the Grand Tetons. And before long, he had built them a shower bath. They went off and left it running. And today, Paul's shower bath is called Yellowstone Falls.
And then finally, we get an interesting new twist on the classic legend of Paul Bunyan, where he ends up meeting a salesman who has a steam-powered saw. And basically, as Paul put it,
Up here, we cut timber with a big axe like this one, and we haul it with a big ox like that one.
So, of course, there ended up being a challenge. Paul and his double-bladed axe versus the salesman and his steam saw. Unfortunately, the salesman won in the end because the stack of logs was just a little bit higher than Paul's. But, of course, they end up by saying that there's no need to be sad for him, because he's actually up in Alaska, and they say that the Aurora Borealis is him and Babe roughhousing and having a good old time. It's a very good short, definitely one that I think everyone should see. It takes from some of the classic stories of Paul Bunyan's legend, but it does take a few little artistic differences. For instance, I do not recall there ever being a time when Paul actually faced up against a guy with a steam saw. In fact, that sounds suspiciously just like John Henry and the steam drill. The only difference is Paul loses instead of wins. But he doesn't die, so that's a plus. Truth be told, I think that's where Walt Disney really got that part from. Why they thought they should do that, I don't know. But it seems to work for the story, though. You know, it talks very well about how he and Babe went and pretty much shaped North America by their work. That's true classic stuff right there. And, you know, the funny thing, this is the only type of show that I've ever seen where it literally had 3 narrators. One from his childhood, one from his story in the Midwest, and another one from his story on the West Coast. So I found that interesting because I've never heard of anything like this happening before or since. Quite literally, we get 3 narrators telling 3 parts of Paul's life and career. Very interesting take, and I'm glad Walt Disney did that because, you know, that was a very new angle, and isn't that about right? I mean, because when it comes to a narrator, sure, it's a narrator's job to be Mr. Know-It-All and just be there to tell the story. But when it comes to a story about somebody's life or a career or anything like that, who really sees it all? Nobody. So it makes perfect sense to do it like this. And quite frankly, I'm glad Disney did because it was a great new angle. It definitely added a new spin to the story. And definitely set an interesting new standard for narration. Although, sadly, it never caught on. Of course, I can't talk about this without pointing out who was the voice to Paul Bunyan, and that would be famous Disney actor and singer Thurl Ravenscroft, better known to us as the man who sang the famous Grinch song. And not to mention, he played also other great characters like Kirby from The Brave Little Toaster, as well as Tony the Tiger. If you haven't seen Paul Bunyan, you really should. It's a great short, definitely worth watching. And don't forget to stay tuned because next week I'll be talking about The Brave Engineer. This is Movie Fan signing off.